The air in the Capitol grew thick, a palpable silence descending as the final tally was displayed. Moments ago, in an unprecedented constitutional rupture, a majority of the United States Congress voted for the immediate removal of a sitting president. The vote, a frantic, chaotic measure born of desperation and fury, has no clear precedent in the text of the Constitution itself. Its legal standing is already evaporating in the heat of the moment, but its political impact is a detonation that has shaken the foundations of the Republic. As the news exploded across screens worldwide, the response from the White House was not one of contrition or concession, but of outright fiery defiance. Donald Trump has said no. This single syllable, delivered not through official channels but in a blistering all-capitals social media post moments after the vote, has effectively thrown a lit match into a room drenched in gasoline. An illegitimate Congress of traitors and cowards has no authority, the statement read in part. The real president stands with the real people. I do not recognize this act of treason. The line between political crisis and potential constitutional collapse has now been blurred beyond recognition. We are witnessing a direct fundamental clash of perceived mandates where two branches of government claim sole legitimate authority, while the third, the judiciary, stares into an abyss of enforcement it may not possess the power to navigate. The mechanisms for resolving such a dispute simply do not exist. To understand the gravity of this hour, one must step back from the precipice and examine the tortuous path that led here. The presidency of Donald Trump has been, from its very inception, a period of sustained institutional stress testing. His first impeachment over allegations of pressuring Ukraine for political gain ended in acquittal by the Senate, solidifying a partisan divide and establishing a template of congressional inquiry met with blanket executive obstruction. The investigations, the subpoenas defied, the norms shattered, each act layered upon the last, creating a brittle landscape where trust between the branches had evaporated long before today's vote. This was not a sudden explosion, but the culmination of a slow-burning fuse. The second impeachment, following the events of January 6, 2021, further entrenched these battle lines. While Trump was acquitted again, the bipartisan vote that saw 7 Republicans join Democrats was a historic crack in the dam. The congressional committees that investigated the attack on the Capitol produced volumes of evidence and findings, which were dismissed by the former president and his allies as a partisan witch hunt. This cyclical pattern, allegation, investigation, denial, acquittal, created a dangerous immunity through exhaustion, convincing a significant portion of the electorate that any official scrutiny was inherently illegitimate. The political system lost its capacity for accountability, setting the stage for a more drastic and legally murkier final act. Concurrently, the electoral landscape grew ever more polarized. The 2020 election results, legally affirmed through dozens of court challenges and state certifications, were rejected by a persistent Stop the Steal movement, which argued the presidency was stolen. This narrative, perpetuated by Trump and echoed by a vast media ecosystem, did not end with the inauguration of President Biden. It transformed into a powerful organizing principle, influencing GOP primaries and reshaping local, state, and federal institutions with officials who question not just policy, but the foundational legitimacy of electoral outcomes themselves. The country was bifurcating into two realities. The return of Donald Trump to the presidency and the subsequent election was perhaps the most divisive event in modern American political history. To his supporters, it was a triumphant restoration of a rightful order and a vindication of their long-held grievances. To his opponents, it was a profound systemic failure, a sign that the guardrails of democracy had utterly collapsed. His second administration pursued an aggressive agenda of retribution and restructuring, targeting the deep state with a zeal that blurred lines between policy and personal vendetta. The federal bureaucracy became a battleground, with loyalists installed in key positions and career officials purged or sidelined, creating a pervasive atmosphere of institutional chaos. It was against this backdrop that the triggering event for today's vote occurred. While the specifics remain classified at the highest levels, sources across multiple agencies confirm it involved a covert action, allegedly ordered directly by the president, that bypassed not only Congress but key elements of the intelligence community and the Pentagon. Early reports, fiercely contested by the White House, suggest the action risked triggering a direct military confrontation with a nuclear-armed adversary. When the action was revealed by a combination of leak and foreign intelligence backlash, the reaction in Congress was one of primal bipartisan horror. For the first time, a faction of the president's own party broke ranks publicly, using words like madness and treason. The initial response was a move for a third impeachment, but the political calculus was immediate and grim. The impeachment process, with its trials and deliberations, was seen by a critical mass of legislators as too slow, too ceremonial for what they perceived as an imminent existential threat. The president, they argued, had demonstrated a clear and present danger to national security that could not wait for months of procedural warfare. A radical, previously fringe legal theory began to circulate among desperate congressional staffers and some constitutional scholars: that Congress possessed an inherent emergency removal power separate from impeachment, derived from its ultimate sovereignty and the grave necessity of the moment. This theory became a rallying cry. Draft legislation was drawn up in secrecy, its language stark and simple. Resolved that Donald J. Trump is hereby removed from the office of the President of the United States, effective upon passage due to a fundamental breach of fiduciary duty and an immediate threat to the security of the Union. The debate, what little there was of it, was conducted in a fever pitch of fear and anger. Procedural rules were set aside. The usual courtesies evaporated. It was raw political power, naked and unrestrained, responding to what it saw as raw executive overreach. The vote was called, and it passed. Now the United States exists in a state of suspended constitutional animation. The president remains in the White House, surrounded by a cadre of loyal advisors and the protective apparatus of the Secret Service. He continues to issue orders, which a significant portion of the executive branch, staffed by his appointees, continues to execute. Simultaneously, Congress has declared the office vacant and, pursuant to the Presidential Succession Act, has recognized the Speaker of the House as the acting president. The Speaker is currently in a secured location, attempting to command the allegiance of the military and cabinet with mixed and chaotic results. Two individuals now claim the title of Commander-in-Chief. The immediate physical chaos is, for now, contained to the corridors of power in Washington, but it is profound. Military aides carry two sets of orders. Cabinet secretaries are receiving conflicting directives from the White House and from the secured bunker where the Speaker attempts to govern. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, according to Pentagon insiders, has effectively placed all strategic forces on a precautionary heightened alert while declaring to both sides that the military will not be the arbiter of a domestic political dispute. This stance, while constitutionally prudent, creates a vacuum of enforceable authority. Across the country, governors are choosing sides, with some mobilizing state National Guard units and others calling for an immediate constitutional convention. The reaction on the streets is a storm of confusion and rising anger. Major cities have seen both spontaneous celebrations and violent protests erupt. Social media platforms are aflame with misinformation and calls to action, some urging peaceful assembly to defend the duly elected president, others calling for a general strike until the coup in Congress ends. Law enforcement agencies from the FBI down to local police departments are caught in an impossible bind, unsure of the legitimate chain of command they are sworn to uphold. The financial markets, sensing the profound instability, have frozen. Trading was halted after the Dow Jones plummeted over 5,000 points in minutes, a crash of historic proportions. Internationally, allies and adversaries alike are staring at their monitors in disbelief. World leaders are being briefed on a scenario their contingency plans never seriously contemplated. NATO ambassadors are requesting urgent clarificatory meetings that the State Department, in its current fractured state, cannot coherently convene. Adversarial nations, seeing an opportunity in the paralysis, are reportedly taking provocative actions in geopolitical hotspots, testing the resolve and the capacity of a United States whose leadership is fundamentally disputed. The global order predicated on American stability has received a shock from which it may not recover, regardless of the domestic outcome. The unthinkable has become operational reality. Legal scholars contacted for this analysis describe the situation as a constitutional nightmare with no clear off-ramp. The framers designed impeachment for a reason. It has specific criteria, procedures, and consequences, says a renowned professor of constitutional law at Yale. What Congress has done is an act of political force majeure. It is revolutionary in the literal sense. They have attempted to revolutionize the system from within, using a power that exists only if enough people believe it exists. It is the political equivalent of shouting, "I declare bankruptcy." The words alone do not make it so, unless everyone else agrees to play along. The judiciary, he notes, may be powerless, as any ruling would require one side to acquiesce to its authority, which is precisely what is being contested. Insiders within the military and intelligence community express profound dread. A retired four-star general who maintains close contacts with the active duty Joint Chiefs states, "This is their worst-case scenario. The principle of civilian control is sacred, but it requires a clear, unambiguous civilian chain of command. That chain is now broken. Unit commanders are being asked to make a choice no soldier should ever make. The longer this persists, the greater the risk of a fragmenting of the armed forces along political lines, which is the textbook definition of a failing state. The concern is not an immediate military coup, but a gradual, corrosive loss of cohesive command that could invite external threats or internal fractionalization. The economic consequences are unfolding with terrifying speed. Beyond the stock market freeze, the dollar is in free fall against every major currency and gold. The Federal Reserve is reportedly in emergency session, but its statements carry little weight when the legitimacy of the government it serves is in question. Treasury bond auctions are failing, meaning the United States government is struggling to borrow money. Credit rating agencies have placed U.S. sovereign debt on watch for a catastrophic downgrade. CEOs of multinational corporations are activating plans to temporarily shut down U.S. operations and relocate critical decision-making hubs overseas. The very plumbing of the global financial system, which runs on trust in U.S. institutions, is seizing up. From a historical perspective, analysts point to moments of severe constitutional crisis, the nullification crisis, the secession winter of 1860-61, Watergate, but note that all of those operated within an agreed-upon framework for resolution, however strained. This is different, argues a presidential historian. This is a direct simultaneous assertion of two mutually exclusive sovereignties. It mirrors the logic of civil war, but fought within the confusing architecture of a modern bureaucratic state. There is no geographical line between sides. They are intermingled in every agency, every courtroom, every military base. The conflict is not over territory, but over the very source of legal authority itself. The media, itself a fractured entity, struggles to narrate an event that defies narrative. Outlets aligned with the president describe a deep state coup, while others describe a necessary intervention to save the republic. The language used on air is a battleground, with careful phrases like the Trump-aligned White House and the Congress-recognized acting administration, creating a babel of titles that confuses the public further. Trust in information itself has evaporated, with each side urging its followers to listen only to their chosen channels. In this environment, rumor and panic spread with viral efficiency, making a coordinated national response to the crisis impossible. Looking ahead, several potential scenarios emerge, each darker than the last. The first and most hopeful is a rapid political collapse of one side's support. If enough Senate Republicans publicly repudiate the president and recognize the speaker, the illusion of his operational control could crumble, leading to a grudging, albeit legally messy, transition. Conversely, if public opinion swings decisively behind Trump and against Congress, state governors and key military commanders could force the speaker to stand down. This scenario, however, appears increasingly unlikely as the hours pass and positions harden into concrete. A second scenario is one of protracted legal and political trench warfare. The Supreme Court could agree to hear an expedited case, but its legitimacy, already under intense scrutiny, might not survive issuing a ruling that one side would inevitably decry as partisan. The court could also decline to intervene, citing the political question doctrine, thereby abdicating its role as referee and cementing the stalemate. This would lead to a de facto partition of the government, with different agencies answering to different masters, a situation that would paralyze federal functions, from disaster response to air traffic control, inevitably causing public suffering and potentially violence. The third scenario is the most feared. an escalation into widespread civil unrest or localized conflict. If the president, for instance, attempts to travel and is physically blocked by forces loyal to Congress, or if units of the military are given contradictory orders in a tense standoff, a single spark could ignite a broader conflagration. The presence of millions of armed citizens steeped in opposing narratives of betrayal and patriotism creates a tinderbox that no institution currently has the undisputed authority to control. The phrase Second Civil War is now being uttered in serious analysis, not as hyperbole, but as a plausible, if not yet probable, outcome. The global implications of a prolonged crisis are catastrophic. Allies in Europe and Asia would be forced to make plans for their own security without the assumption of a coherent American partner. Adversaries like Russia or China could move decisively to alter territorial facts on the ground, calculating that a paralyzed U.S. cannot respond. The nuclear command and control system, while designed with safeguards, enters a realm of profound uncertainty when the identity of the lawful commander is contested. The entire architecture of international treaties, trade agreements, and alliances rests on the continuity of the American state. That continuity is now in question. Beyond the immediate power struggle, the long-term damage to the American idea is incalculable. The nation's power has always derived not just from its military or economy, but from the perceived stability of its system. The guaranteed peaceful transfer of power, the rule of law, the enduring strength of its constitution, that perception has been shattered on the global stage. For generations, the United States has urged other nations to resolve their differences democratically and within constitutional frameworks. That moral authority has evaporated overnight. The nation now joins the list of fragile democracies it once sought to guide, a cautionary tale in real time. As night falls on this first unimaginable day, Washington is a city of shadows and checkpoints. The White House is illuminated, a defiant beacon. The Capitol is silent, its halls empty but for security details. Between them lies a gulf not of miles, but of mutual incomprehension and shattered trust. The machinery of government has ground to a halt, not through invasion or catastrophe, but through a failure of a common story. The American experiment was always a gamble on a set of ideas, on process over personality, on institutions over individuals, on a document's ability to bind a diverse people. That gamble is now being called in the most severe terms. The coming hours will be critical. Back-channel communications are reportedly frantic, but no credible path to de-escalation has emerged. Both sides appear convinced that any concession is tantamount to national destruction. The world watches, holds its breath, and begins the grim work of contingency planning for a post-American era of global disorder. The question is no longer about policy or party. It is about whether a modern, complex nation can function when there is no agreed-upon answer to the most basic question: who is in charge? The silence that follows that question is the loudest and most dangerous sound in the world tonight. This is not merely a political crisis. It is a metaphysical crisis of the state. The social contract, that implicit agreement between the governed and the government, has been torn in two. When a population looks to its capital and sees not a government, but a riddle, the bonds of society itself begin to fray. The chaos is not just in the streets or the markets. It is in the human heart, in the loss of a shared reality that makes collective life possible. The founding generation feared faction and mob rule. They constructed checks and balances to slow passion with reason. Today, that system has not just failed, it has turned in on itself, its parts now working in violent opposition. In the end, the resolution will not be found in the fine print of constitutional law, for this crisis exists outside that print. It will be found, if it is found at all, in the hands of individuals, of generals who choose restraint, of officials who choose the institution over the man, of politicians who find a shred of forgotten patriotism, or it will be found in their failure to do so. The vote taken today in Congress was an act of profound fear. The refusal from the White House was an act of profound will. Caught between them is the fate of a nation and the stability of a world that can no longer rely on its cornerstone. The chaos has not just been triggered, it has been invited inside, and it has taken a seat at the very center of power.